Hello and welcome to the Hacking State podcast. This is your host, Alex Mershak. With me today is the Raw Egg Nationalist. Raw Egg is the creator and publisher of Man's World magazine, is also the co-founder of Kindred Harvest, and the author of the Eggs Benedict Option. Raw Egg Nationalist, thank you for coming on.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to finally talk to you. I've been following you for quite a long time on the interwebs, and we're in a lot of related spheres. But I feel like the timing was right to finally get you on and have a conversation. And in particular, I'm interested in kind of the resurgence of Vitalist culture and predictions that you might have for the coming vibe shift, at least here in America and maybe elsewhere in the Anglosphere, as well as some more recent things that you're working on as well. But you published a book a few years ago called The Eggs Benedict Option. And I wanted to actually start there because I feel like that piece of work, in a way, encapsulates a lot of the philosophy that you've created around yourself and around your online persona. So talk to me about the Eggs Benedict Option, how it's been received so far, and what you were sort of beginning to formulate when you wrote that.
Yes, I think the Eggs Benedict option up to this point has been the kind of the greatest summation really of my thoughts about food and politics and all sorts of other things as well. So it really is like an actual. It was the first real kind of coming together, actually, I think, of the kind of raw egg nationalism doctrine,
Hmm.
connecting it to current events, connecting it in particular to this plan for a global plant-based diet. So that's what the book is about. The book is about global plant-based diet and who's pushing it, why, what it might mean for us as human beings, as a species, biologically, also politically. And also then the second half of the book is the Eggs Benedict option. It's my alternative sort of political vision, really, to this global plant-based diet that's being pushed by organizations like the World Economic Forum, globalists more generally, NGOs, scientific establishment, governments. Um, so the Eggs Benedict option basically is a return to the way we used to eat. It's a return to animal-based diets, drawing on the work of people like Weston Price, the very famous dentist and nutritionist, and also drawing on some interesting kind of real world examples. Russia.
Hmm.
Russia isn't a particularly popular country at the moment, but it actually offers a very, very interesting example of how you can do small scale localist agriculture in a way that benefits individuals and their communities as an alternative to, I suppose, this kind of vision of a globalized, mega industrial, corporate controlled system of agriculture that will be used to feed a global population of 10 billion people and is thoroughly kind of part of this kind of vision of a global plant-based diet. So it's a book. It was a timely book, I thought. I mean, it was
Hmm.
written during the pandemic, and
Yes.
we were starting to be told, that we were being told, by the World Economic Forum and celebrities and philanthropists and captains of industry and prime ministers and presidents and world leaders, that there was going to be this thing called the Great Reset, and that an integral part of it was going to be a fundamental change to the way that we eat. And really, I suppose the central premise of the book, and the book actually starts with an episode, a short episode from Plato's Republic, where Plato's Socrates, is talking with his companions about the relationship between food and social control. And so the book
Hmm.
really is
Yeah.
about food and social control and the fact that, you know, we've kind of forgotten that those things go together, and actually food goes, control of the food supply is a very, very important part of social control. And it has been since the ancient Greeks, since the time of Plato, who's probably the first social planner, really, or first social planner whose works survive. And so I was really trying to make people aware of what's going on, to make people aware that this kind of vision of global social change that is called social and political change, that's called the Great Reset, is built on a transformation of the way that we eat, of the way that food is produced, and that actually, in many interesting ways, this mirrors an earlier transition that took place in the Near East, the agricultural revolution, the Neolithic revolution, whatever you want to call it, about 10 to 12,000 years ago, when fixed field farming, domestication of animals, started to become more widespread. It kind of spread out from this area that's called the Southern Alluvium around the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. That was the dawn of agriculture, and that was a massive social change.
Mm.
Agriculture allowed totally new political forms to emerge. The state, I mean, the state didn't exist. States didn't exist before the creation of agriculture. And so I draw these historical parallels with the agricultural revolution, and I say, look, it's happened before. We've seen a fundamental transformation in the way food is produced, uh, supporting a fundamental political and social transformation. And that's how we should think about this new plant-based agenda that's being pushed. So it was a timely book, I thought, and it was very, very well received, and got a lot of people talking. Really helped to, I think, to improve my profile and to spread the message. And now I've just finished another book, which is going to be coming out I think at the end of April, beginning of May, with Passage Press. That's
Mm.
called The Last Men, Liberalism and the Death of Masculinity. And that's about some related themes, but it focuses particularly actually on testosterone decline and on some of the themes of the Tucker Carlson documentary that I was in, The End of Men, and we can
Yes.
talk about that if you'd like to.
Great. No, I mean, I would love to just make an aside comment about this, which is that one of the things that I really love about your entire oeuvre of your work that you've put together is just this connection between the individual biological creature, his interactions with his environment, and the way that turns into actions in terms of the overarching political system.
Mm,
This point that you brought up about Plato's Republic and people having forgotten the connection between social control and food is a sort of is again one of those gems from the ancient world that we forgot about, which is that there is a direct relationship not only between the biological substrate of a population and its political arrangements, but also between how that biology is cultivated, right? The exercises that the citizens are allowed to engage in, the food that they're allowed to eat. In our case, the environmental, toxins and disruptors that we're exposed to, all of that affects on an individual level, one's, assertiveness, sense of agency, action in the world, energy levels, and that has downstream effects on, what kinds of things we're willing to tolerate, what kinds of social behavior we're willing to engage in. I see you posting pretty frequently about, the relationship between male testosterone levels and social masking of various kinds.
mm.
That's a very simple thing that if you think about the decline of male testosterone in the aggregate population over the last several decades, maybe that's affecting our social interactions, right? Maybe that's affecting whether people are willing to speak up for themselves, whether people are willing to disagree, and these things accumulate, in terms of their impact over time. And I think you're the one person that has really made this connection as clear as possible out of all the other people writing and thinking online. So I just wanted to say, I give you praise for doing so, and thank you for making that connection so explicit.
No, thank you. Well, yeah, I mean that is one of the main themes I think of my work has been, yeah, the relationship between individual biology and effects on individual biology, the effects of the world that we've created, and in particular this massively, massively poisoned world that we've created with these novel chemicals, mainly associated with plastics and industrial processes, but also with agriculture, herbicides, pesticides, etc. the relationship between the individual health and collective health, and I suppose the political system as well, because like you say, I mean, these things have individual effects, but they also have aggregate effects, and those aggregate effects, of course, I mean, it should be common sense, that
Hmm.
of course those aggregate effects are going to touch on political behavior. And I mean, it was very noticeable during the pandemic, for example, that one of the most vocal groups of people against the lockdown measures, the social restrictions, etc., were gym bros. It was,
Hmm.
there were multiple examples of gym owners refusing to close their gyms,
Right.
uh, and that was no coincidence. That was no coincidence, and that really illustrates some of the central points that I like to make about the relationship between physical cultivation and virtue, political virtue. I mean, it wasn't for nothing, for example, that in ancient Greece, slaves weren't allowed to use the gymnasia
Hmm.
because, I mean, the ancient Greeks understood that actually, if you cultivate strength, if you cultivate athletic ability, um, uh, physical self-confidence, capability, then, I mean, that is an essential part of being a good citizen. It's an essential part of being a good citizen. And also, conversely, if you want to keep people in a servile position, in a position of weakness, then you actually deny that to them. You deny the opportunity to use the gymnasia to develop their bodies, to develop what the ancient Greeks called thymos, which
Mm.
is this sort of thrusting, assertive sense of spiritedness, I suppose is the best way to describe it. That's
Yes.
what the Greeks thought thymos was, spiritedness. You go to the gym, you develop spiritedness, you develop virtue, and you're a good citizen, and you're a warrior as well if needed. Um, so yeah, I mean these are ancient. This is ancient common sense, really. I mean, that's probably the best way to think of it. Actually, is to think, like these our ancestors understood this stuff intuitively. It didn't really have to be explained to them, but it
Mm.
has to be explained to us for various reasons that I go into. I mean, some are clearer than others, but it is nevertheless, I think, the case that we have forgotten a lot of wisdom about the relationship between mind and body, between physical capability and virtue, between the kind of the virtues and the physical capabilities that are necessary to sustain a just political system. And yeah, I mean, all of these things have been dramatized over the last 4 or 5 years with the pandemic, especially. It's yes. I mean, my work is very timely, I think, and I
Mm.
think that I've been vindicated in various different ways particularly by the pandemic.
Yes, yes, a man of your time, or a
Mhm.
man for your time, rather.
Mm.
So let's talk a little bit about your upcoming book.
Mm.
I don't know how much you want to reveal, but we could sort of tease on that. And it's,
Yeah, of course.
you said that it was heavily impacted by your feature in the Tucker Carlson documentary, The End
Mm.
of Men. You've called it The Last Men, which seems to me to be possibly a reference to Nietzsche's Last Man. And so
Hmm.
let's talk a little bit about what can people see coming up in that book, and maybe a little bit about your experience with the documentary.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So the document. I'll talk about the documentary first, actually, as a kind of prelude to the book. So,
Hmm.
I was in a Tucker Carlson documentary in 2022 called "The End of Men," and it was about testosterone decline, about masculine decline, starting from the premise that testosterone levels have been declining precipitously across the Western world for decades, which they have. This is a very, very well substantiated scientific finding. Testosterone levels are decreasing in Israel, in the US, in Finland, in every country where there are data for testosterone levels over time, over the last 50 years, 70 years, maybe even slightly more. You will find that actually the average testosterone level is declining precipitously by something like 1% per year, year on year.
Hmm.
So there's that, and then there's also, I mean, it's part of a broader reproductive decline. So it's not just that testosterone levels are declining; it's also that sperm counts and sperm quality are declining at a similarly precipitous rate. And so, you have these predictions, for example, by world experts as well. So this isn't cranks. I mean, this is people, this is, world experts, people like Professor Shanna Swan, for example, at Mount Sinai, University in New York, you know, on the basis of sperm count data, just simply extrapolating the trends. She's predicted that by 2045, the median man will have a sperm count of 0. And what that means basically is that one half of all men will produce no sperm at all,
Wow.
and the other half will produce so few that they might as well produce none because then they can't do anything with them. I
Mm.
mean, you have to have a certain amount of sperm in your semen in order to fertilize an egg. I mean, if you've got below a certain amount, it's just not going to happen. So that's often referred to in the popular press as a spermageddon
Mm.
scenario, and it's been talked about a little bit, for maybe for the past sort of 10 or so years, but now it's really starting to get some traction, and people are starting to take notice of it. So those were the kind of premises of the documentary, that there is this pervasive masculine decline happening, testosterone levels, sperm counts, etc., and that it's having effects politically too, right? That it's a political issue. And so the documentary looked at some of the causes, and in particular, exposure to harmful endocrine disrupting chemicals. So these are hormone disrupting chemicals, mainly chemicals that mimic the female hormone estrogen.
Mm.
So it's this strange kink actually of modern industrial chemistry that so many chemicals, so many harmful chemicals actually behave like estrogen in the human body. And so they upset the natural balance between testosterone and estrogen with various different harmful effects for both sexes. So,
Mhm.
men have more testosterone than estrogen. Women have more estrogen than testosterone, but both sexes need both of those hormones in the correct ratios. And so, if you're exposed to harmful chemicals that mimic estrogen, those balances get thrown totally out of kilter. And so, men become kind of feminized. Their testosterone decreases. They can have reproductive, actually physical abnormalities. They have small penises. Their testes don't develop. They can even be infertile. They have gynecomastia, which is man boobs.
Mhm.
And then a whole host of other things can happen to women as well. So it can affect their fertility. It can give them things like polycystic ovarian syndrome and endometriosis and ovarian cancer and vaginal cancer. And it can make it hard or impossible for women to conceive. So, I mean, these chemicals, they have dreadful effects, well substantiated, reams of literature, thousands of studies of animals and humans, population studies, intervention studies in the lab, etc. So, yeah, the documentary was an exploration of this crisis, and particularly a focus on these harmful chemicals. But then the second half of the documentary was about a group of people who are trying to do something about it, and that's where I came in with some of my fellow Twitter anons. So I was still anonymous then.
Mhm.
My identity was only revealed last summer. So this was 2022 when the documentary came out. Uh, a group of right-wing bodybuilders, including myself, we went to Alex Jones's ranch and filmed this insane montage of, shooting seed oils with a rifle and wrestling. And there was this very famous or infamous even moment where one of us stands on a rock and adopts the Vitruvian Man pose from
Mhm.
Leonardo da Vinci and has a Juve red light machine shining on his testicles and
Right. Sun your balls.
sun your balls, yeah, because getting sunlight or red light on your testicles stimulates testosterone production.
Mhm.
So yeah, so there was this documentary, and it was a big thing. It was a big thing. It generated a lot of hysteria in the liberal media. There were all sorts of cries of fascism and oh, this is because of glorification of the body.
Right.
Oh, this is so homoerotic. This is Tucker Carlson displaying his homoerotic fantasies and all this kind of stuff. But it was a big thing. It was generated a lot of hype and it had it was a big thing for a few weeks at least, and certainly I've written about the response to the documentary and the way that, for example, the kind of homoerotic slur was used and is used more broadly actually to demonize masculine culture, masculine behavior, to make men afraid to associate with one another and to do masculine things.
Hmm.
Uh, and this is actually something that even someone like C.S. Lewis talked about in the 1940s. Famously said in Four Types of Love something along the lines of people who confuse friendship with eros betray the fact that they have never had a friend themselves, something like
Hmm.
that. It's like if you think that the love between friends is the same as sexual love, romantic love, then all you're doing is you're saying you've never had a proper friend before, which
Right.
is true. And so even in the 1940s, then people were making that kind of spurious association between male friendship and homoeroticism and homosexuality. Um, so that was a big thing for me. I mean, that really pushed my being in that documentary really pushed my profile to another level. I mean, half of the documentary was about me. So the documentary was about 40 minutes, and at least 20 minutes of it were about me. And then the other 20 minutes were about RFK Jr., more or
Hmm.
less, and the Kennedy family, So I was one of the two big stars of this documentary, and I went on Tucker Carlson. I actually went on his nightly show to talk about it, and that was insane. And so, I had a fairly decent profile before, but overnight, then that really, really pushed me to another level. But the book, which I started writing in the summer, late spring, early summer, The Last Men, Liberalism and the Death of Masculinity, which is being published by Passage Press. That really picks up the themes of the documentary: testosterone decline, male reproductive decline, and uh, looks at the political implications of these things. I mean, that was a focus of the documentary, but I'm really kind of fleshing it out and really trying to consider actually what are the implications of this pervasive testosterone decline that's happening. And yeah, well done for picking up on the Nietzsche reference. I mean, so it's situated actually. I situate testosterone decline within Francis Fukuyama's end of history thesis,
Mm,
and
okay.
which is a Nietzschean thesis, So people forget when they read Francis Fukuyama, or when they say they've read Francis Fukuyama, that actually, the book isn't called The End of History. The book is called The End of History and the Last Man. And the final quarter of the book, uh, people think of the book as a triumphalist, a paean to the triumph of liberal democracy over communism, which
Hmm.
it kind of is, and that's how it's remembered, and that's how he's kind of portrayed as this sort of straw man of liberal hubris in the kind of post 1989 moment. But actually, the final quarter of the book is a really searing Nietzschean critique of life under liberal democracy. And Fukuyama says, basically, okay, liberal democracy has triumphed and it doesn't look like there's a better system, but actually, what is the cost on a personal level, on a social level, of the triumph of liberal democracy? And so he says, well, basically, actually, we've been reduced to the last men. This kind of crepuscular, one-dimensional figure who is described by Nietzsche. This kind of person who is good basically only for uh, buying stuff, for being a consumer, for being a kind of passive recipient of sort of commodity culture.
Hmm. The bug
So
man.
yeah, basically, yeah, the bug man in Bronze Age perverts philosophy. So um what I basically am trying to say is that actually, what Fukuyama says has happened because of the nature of liberal democracy, the way that liberal democracy is structured, the things that liberal democracy allows you to do and doesn't allow you to do. You are one amongst equals. That's it. That's your status within liberal democracy, right? You are one amongst millions of tens of millions, hundreds of millions of equals. Alongside that kind of uh, triumph of that political system, then we also have this parallel biological decline that's taking place. So, I mean, Fukuyama talks about the triumph of liberal democracy as the suppression of thymos, and in particular, the suppression of megalothymia, which is a particular variant of thymos, where uh, thymos is, like I said, spiritedness, assertiveness. Well, megalothymia is, in particular, the desire to seek distinction over others. So
Mm.
megalothymia is a kind of competitive desire to be better than your peers.
To
And
move to a higher,
yeah,
right,
exactly. And that's precisely what actually liberal democracy doesn't really allow you to do.
right. You get the great flattening of the world.
Yes, yeah, and so there's this aspect. I mean, the Greeks were very, very acute understanders. They had a very acute understanding of human motivations, and you know, it's obviously true that men do desire distinction, and they do desire to assert themselves over others. They do
Mm.
have this kind of thrusting desire, but liberal democracy doesn't allow that to be satisfied. Well, I make the argument basically that actually thymos and particularly megalothymia, well, that is testosterone. The kind of behaviors that are associated with megalothymia and thymos more generally are associated with testosterone. And there's this, really, really broad scientific clinical literature about the kind of behaviors that are associated with high and low testosterone. And so really the book starts from the premise that actually Fukuyama wasn't pessimistic enough about the decline that is taking the decline in kind of man's capabilities, if you will, that is taking place as a result of liberal democracy. Because not only is it a political decline, in the sense that liberal democracy can't satisfy thymos and man's particular urges, or certain of man's particular urges, but also this is biological thing happening as well,
Mm.
intertwined with it, where actually we have created a world that is toxic and that is sapping us of our thymos. So Fukuyama thought that thymos was a fixed quantity. You
Mm.
might be able to say that, right? Like thymos is a fixed quantity, and it just so happens that liberal democracy, it just doesn't have anywhere to go. Well, actually, no, that's not the case. Actually, thymos is being drained. Our
Right. There's a
thymos is
feedback
being,
loop.
yes, yeah. And so it's, yeah. So I mean, it's a kind of sophisticated argument, if I may, if I may say so myself, about the relationship between the political and the hormonal. So
Mm.
I don't think that there's ever really been a proper attempt to write a hormonal theory of politics, and so that's what I'm doing really. I mean, it's
Yes.
a beginning to it. Is trying to say, well, actually, look, what are the effects of, on a political scale, on a social level, of pervasive testosterone decline? What is this doing to us? What does it mean? And also, of course, because I like to dispense advice and I like to, I want to help people. What can we do about it? And so I give individual advice in the book, stuff that I talk about, at length on Twitter and elsewhere. But I'm also try to think about how politically, we could do something about it, whether it will be enough, what we would need to do to reverse testosterone decline, what we would need to do to create a political environment that isn't quite so hostile to masculinity and to masculine urges, etc. So yeah, I mean it's like the Eggs Benedict option, I suppose, in this fundamental respect. It's a description, but it's also a prescription as well. So I'm trying to think about, ways that we could actually do something about this. And again, I think it's a timely book because, Donald Trump's just come into power with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who was in the documentary with me, leading Health and Human Services now with his Make America Healthy Again agenda. I mean,
Yes.
he's someone who really does understand. He was in the End of Men for a reason. He understands the importance of testosterone, and he also understands. I mean, he's a jacked 70-year-old. I mean, he's in
Mhm.
really great shape. He lives a very active life. He understands testosterone, but he also understands he understands these environmental problems. He understands these toxic exposures. He understands endocrine disruptors, and he understands the way that the American industrial system, the regulatory system, the political system allows for these chemicals basically to be licensed, to be used. Uh, and so I mean he has very very sensible ideas about reforming the system, which I'm definitely in favor of. So yeah, it's an interesting time for the book to come out. It's going to come out just be a few months into Trump's presidency. RFK Jr. will be starting to get his teeth into these very serious problems of you know toxins in the food supply, toxins in the water, toxins in the broader environment, etc. So yeah, I mean, it couldn't actually really be a be a better time for the book to come out. It's definitely the right moment for this book. This is the book for the Make America Healthy Again moment, I think.
Yes, yes. So I'm equally excited about RFK Jr. and Make
Mm.
America Healthy Again. And this is a good opportunity to kind of segue into another topic for this discussion, which is this sense and maybe we have this sense because we're in some kind of information bubble, but I don't think that's the case. I get the feeling that it's a broader cultural recognition of this resurgence of vitalist culture, that people are actually
Yeah.
ready to take health and vitality seriously again, and to begin assessing the ways in which our environment, our food supply, etc., are actually
Mm.
extremely detrimental to good health and overall well-being and strength. Um, and so, you just said that this seems like a good moment for the book.
Mm.
Um, I think you and I share our optimism about kind of this, what I would say is a vitalist moment in culture. Um, you know, do you expect that there will be lasting cultural, social changes as a result of this?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I mean, there will have to be for
Hmm.
this to work, for Make America Healthy Again to work. There will have to be lasting social and cultural changes because that is
Well,
everything is so messed up. Everything is
yeah.
so
I mean,
messed
this
up.
isn't this isn't Michelle Obama telling you that there need to be vegetables in school lunches, right?
No, no. I mean, no. We need a fundamental reform, not only of the way that food is produced, of
Hmm.
the way that chemicals are licensed, of the responsibility that corporations have for the environment, etc., and for safeguarding human health, but also of the way that consumers behave, of the way that individuals uh, relate to food, of the way that children relate to food in particular. I mean, the figures for consumption of processed food, for example, or ultra processed food, show that I mean something like 2 to 5 year olds. I think they get two-thirds now on average of their daily calories from ultra processed foods. I mean, this is a
That's insane.
serious. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah, and it's a problem that's only actually getting worse. And so yes, we need a fundamental rethink. People need to be educated. People need to be encouraged and given the resources actually to make the right kind of choices.
Hmm.
They need to understand the relationship between body and mind, between mental well-being and physical well-being. And we need to return to, as I was saying, a kind of a more ancient understanding, a classical understanding of the relationship between mind and body, that we are an integrated whole.
Hmm.
You're not a mind piloting a meat suit. You are your body. You are an integrated whole. And that will require all sorts of changes. I mean, one of the very interesting things in the Tucker Carlson documentary was the documentary actually opened with some archival footage of John F. Kennedy, and he was talking about this very famous high school fitness program called the La Sierra program. So there was a high school in California called La Sierra, and they decided to create this military style fitness program for the boys. I don't know whether it was just a boys' school or whether it was a boys and girls' school, but certainly the boys were doing this military style fitness test
Hmm.
or fitness program, and there were various different grades, and depending on how well you did on it, you would get like a gold medal or a silver medal or whatever. But it was hardcore stuff. I mean, like uh carrying someone, like running for 5 miles with someone on your back, and climbing ropes and push-ups and chin-ups, and it really was a serious thing, like a military boot camp.
Hmm.
And John F. Kennedy, apparently, before he wanted to die, before he died, wanted to uh, roll out this La Sierra program across the United States. So there was archival footage in The End of Men of John F. Kennedy talking about fat children and saying, like Americans are becoming unhealthier and unhealthier, and it's terrible to see a fat child, and no parent wants to have a fat child, and we have a responsibility. The health of the nation is dependent on the health of the individual, and that's a central message of Raw Egg Nationalism, of course. So there's this archival footage of John F. Kennedy saying, we need to lead a national revival, and it starts with physical training. It starts with making sure that everybody uses their body, everybody knows how to use their body and develops their physical capabilities. And what's interesting about that, actually, about the use of that footage, is that, you know, John F. Kennedy is the archetypal progressive president, right? I mean, he's the darling of the Democrats, Um, and yet, here he is in this footage saying exactly the same stuff as these dangerous right-wing bodybuilders and neo-fascists and Tucker Carlson with his, Nazi obsession. And so, I mean, it was actually something that the criticisms of the documentary, that the critics of the documentary just didn't mention. They didn't say, actually, John F. Kennedy was saying all of this stuff in the 1960s, and he was a Democrat.
Hmm.
But that is exactly why that footage was in there, to show that actually this isn't a partisan issue, or it shouldn't be. This is about more than party politics. This is about the health and actually the survival of the nation, because ill health is crippling. Ill health is destroying the nation. Ill health is even just on a monetary level, you look at the cost of chronic disease in the US. I mean, it is crippling. It is absolutely crippling. And the supposed solutions, things like weight loss drugs like Wegovy, Ozempic, the cost of that, the cost of administering these weight loss drugs, even only partially subsidized by the taxpayer, would basically break the bank. We're talking trillions of dollars would
Yeah.
have to be spent to get the. I think it's something, like 70% of American adults are overweight or obese now, right?
Well,
So we're talking
it's also not actually making you become a more virtuous person.
no,
I
no,
know a bunch
precisely.
of I know a bunch of people, too many people that are on Ozempic right now and who've
Mm,
lost a tremendous amount of weight and they look
mm,
better and they feel better.
mm.
But it's like you didn't actually have to put in the work. There was no
No,
fundamental change in your
no,
attitudes, your behavior, your sense of self-respect. All that you did was you injected this drug that makes you not hungry.
yep,
And as soon as you stop doing that, it's all
yep,
going to come right back. You haven't actually, and your
yeah,
health actually hasn't even really improved. You're just
no.
less fat than you were.
Well, this is, I mean, yeah, I've written at length about these weight loss drugs, and from various different angles, because you've got these horrible side effects,
Yeah. Decreased
chronic
libido among them.
chronic diarrhea. There's the
Mm.
there's the up to and including death, but there's things like thyroid tumors in the long term. But the thing is, yes, I mean these drugs are drugs that people are actually going to have to take forever.
Hmm.
This has already been established. For the most part, and actually executives at companies like Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk have actually said on record, look, yeah, we anticipate that the majority of people who use these drugs will have to use them forever if they don't want to go back to being as fat as they were before. And there are plenty of studies that show, look, you come off these drugs and you rebound. It happens massively. And the other thing is that you take these drugs and actually a large portion of the weight loss, more actually than if you did a traditional program of calorie restriction and exercise, more of the weight that comes off when you take these GLP-1 receptor agonist drugs is muscle, is lean tissue. And that's very, very bad. So you end up being slimmer
Yeah, you get these skinny
with
fats.
you get skinny fat, so you have less muscle, you come off the drugs, and then your metabolic needs are lower because you have less lean tissue. And so actually you put on weight very, very easily because you don't have any of this you don't have more of this metabolically expensive muscle tissue that actually is insurance against weight gain.
Mhm.
I mean, that's one of the arguments for building muscle as a strategy for maintaining a healthy weight is that actually, you know, the more muscle you have, the more food you have to eat to get into a caloric surplus to put on fat. Well, you know, so there's all sorts of there's all sorts of things to be said against these weight loss drugs. I mean, I do think that in certain cases, yes, some people are so hugely overweight and so hopeless that there isn't an alternative. I mean, if you want to get them to lose weight, then you're probably going to have to give them these drugs. But I don't think that normal people or, ordinary people should actually be encouraged to take these weight loss drugs as their first port of call. And there was a study, actually, a survey that was done recently, I saw that said that actually it was done in the new year. It was looking at people's New Year's resolutions and comparing New Year's resolutions with previous years. And it looks like actually more and more people are saying, you know what, I'm not even going to bother with the gym. I'm just going to go straight to Ozempic. I'm just going to take Ozempic. I want to lose weight. No, I'm not buying a gym membership. I'm just going to take Ozempic. And that's exactly what's going to happen. So,
Hmm.
ordinary people who actually could lose weight, if they developed a bit of backbone, if they change their habits, are just going to take Ozempic. And I think it's bad. I think it's bad for all the reasons that I've outlined. And I also think it's bad because it gives more power to the medical industry. It's more power to big pharma over our lives. One of the things that I've written about at length is medical harm and the medicalization of society. It's often called iatrogenesis. So there's a
Right.
great book called Medical Nemesis,
Mm.
The Limits of Medicine by Ivan Illich, which I would recommend everybody who's interested in big pharma and the dangers of big pharma having more control over society. Everyone who's interested in that should read it. You know, we've surrendered so much power, individual power, to big pharma over the last century. I mean, we've already surrendered control of our moods, for example, to a huge extent. In a country like Scotland, 1/4 of all adults are now on antidepressants. So
Wow.
1 million out of four. And I mean, it's not quite that bad in the US, but it's something like 20%. It might, or it's 17.5%, I think it is, of adults are on antidepressants. So we already rely on big pharma to regulate our moods in a way that, we never did before. And now we're saying, okay, well, now we need big pharma to regulate our weight as well because we can't do it ourselves. And that's exactly what their advertising says. If you look at their advertising, they say, it's not your fault you can't lose weight. There are genetic factors, there are environmental factors. It's beyond your control. You'll do a calorie restricted diet and it won't work, but that's not your fault. So take these drugs and then you will lose weight. And you know, that kind of messaging is being pushed very hard by these companies because, like Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, because they're making huge amounts of money. I mean, Novo Nordisk, the manufacturer of Ozempic, is now the largest company in Europe
Mm.
solely off the back of Ozempic, right?
Right.
its value, so it's from Denmark, its value is $200 billion more than the entire economy of Denmark now, Novo Nordisk, right? I mean,
Wow.
my prediction, and I wrote a piece for the Epoch Times called "The Fat of the Land"
Mm,
about this. My prediction is that Novo Nordisk will probably be the biggest company in the world within 10 or 15 years, just off the back of these fat jabs. You know, there are a billion people worldwide who are overweight or obese, or
mm,
in fact, I think it's a billion people who are obese. So, you know, I mean, that's an enormous market to sell a weight loss product that has to be taken for life if you want to, you know, if you want to experience the benefits for life. So, yeah, I mean, you know, these companies are going to become so enormously powerful and have an enormous power over our lives, over the economy, politically too. You know, I mean, when a company is worth that much money, it has huge clout,
mm.
and so yeah, I mean, I think we need to understand what we're getting into, and we need to ask do we really want this? Or would it actually be better if we encouraged people to lose weight and supported them in losing weight, gave them options, made it easier for them to eat, to have access to wholesome food, to be able to exercise, and all these other things, you know. And RFK Jr. is someone, I think, who fundamentally understands all of this. You know, he talked during the election campaign about wellness camps that he would love to set up
Yeah.
a
Those aren't
whole
euphemisms, by the way.
no, no. I mean, genuinely, it's like
Yeah.
here's somewhere where you can go if you're unwell,
Mm,
if you're overweight, if you're a recovering addict, if
right.
you're coming off antidepressants, whatever. You go to one of these camps and you have sunshine and you eat good food and you exercise and you get out in nature. I mean, you know, I mean, it's like the opposite of the big pharma method, which is just to give you another pill, to prescribe you another pill.
Yeah.
And it is going to take something, a fundamental rethink, I think.
Mm,
If we actually do want to break the cycle of medicalization, if we want to stop this progressive, I mean, it's not even creep now. I mean, it's just like a total takeover of society. And obviously, you know, the pandemic was a very dramatic representation of the power that Big Pharma now has to govern our lives in a state, not only in a state of
if people
emergency.
let them.
Yes, yeah, but also I think that the we should be careful not to think that it's just states of emergency where Big Pharma has this power, right?
Mm,
Actually, what we need to see is this power's there. It's there all the time. Anyway, you know, we have this dramatic moment, a pandemic, where suddenly, all of those powers are brought out, and we see um, the naked use of political power by big pharma to determine exactly what we do and where we go and who we associate with and whether we can work and whether we're socially shamed or not and all this kind of stuff. But actually, you know, that power is there operating anyway. And a lot of the techniques of control that we saw perhaps for the first time during the pandemic, you know, these things like monitoring of social media, big data, kind of control, misinformation, disinformation, all of this kind of stuff. You know, that's now been normalized. And I mean, I wrote a piece for American Mind actually about this called The Nexus of What's Next, about the way that actually these techniques of control that were being used during the pandemic to monitor people and make sure that they weren't expressing the wrong opinions and spreading misinformation, etc. You know, they're being used now. They're just normal. They're being used
right.
now so you have
Is
companies
a
like,
testing ground for all
yeah,
these
it was. I mean,
programs.
it
Yeah.
really was a testing ground. And so, you know, you have companies like Moderna, vaccine manufacturer, right? They have a misinformation unit now. They actually have former intelligence people working for them using big data, monitoring social media for misinformation about vaccines. And they produce reports and they talk to governments about it. And, you know, I mean, it's sinister as hell, right? But it
Mm,
was totally normalized during the pandemic. People accepted it. And so it remains. So, I mean, all of these things are tied up. Just weight loss drugs. It's all part of this. It's all part of this much broader kind of system of medicalization that I think that we need to be aware of,
It's
and
like a
that we need.
sickness complex.
It is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's not just about individual drugs, although, these weight loss drugs are headline grabbing, and there's a lot of focus on them because of celebrities and how many people are taking them up and the horrible side effects and all that kind of stuff. But actually, it's big pharma more generally. It's our attitude towards medicine and the medical industry more generally, I think that we really need to be thinking about. And luckily, like I say, RFK Jr. knows all of this stuff. I mean, during the pandemic, he was at the forefront of attempts to resist the social measures, mandatory vaccinations, all that kind of stuff. So it's quite an amazing thing, really, actually, that now, after being so vilified during the pandemic, he's actually head of Health and Human Services. I mean,
Yes.
that's a huge thing. It doesn't mean that he hasn't still got a real uphill battle ahead of
Mm.
him, because he does. I mean, he's fighting entrenched interests that have hundreds of billions of dollars, maybe even more than hundreds of billions of dollars at stake. You know, and that was made very clear by when RFK Jr. was actually confirmed, when his appointment was confirmed, Pfizer and Moderna stock prices tumbled. I mean, they fell like 5%,
Right. Why
something
would they
like
do
that.
that?
Yeah, well, because exactly, because he's talked about a reckoning. He's talked about the damage that was done by these vaccines. He's talked about how wrong it was for them to be basically mandatory, and but yeah, he's got a big fight ahead of him because of these entrenched interests. But I think it's a fight that he's up to. I mean, it's something that he's basically been preparing for decades, for 30 or 40 years, ever since he started his environmental campaigning. This is the fight of his life, and he has talked about feeling that he has a God sent mission. Really, he has talked about this sense of mission that he has, that he wants to heal America, that he wants particularly to heal America's children, that it's such an outrage that American children are so unhealthy. And it is, of course it is.
Yeah, of course. So one last thing before we head out. This has been
Mm,
fantastic. You're going to be speaking at the upcoming Natal Conference
I
in
am.
Austin, Texas, the second of its kind.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that everything that we've talked about so far, this relationship between hormones and politics, the
Mm,
importance of individual health and the virtues cultivated therein, as well as the sort of resistance or pushing back against the over medicalization of society, all ties in somewhere to the crisis in fertility that myself and many
mm,
others have been talking about the last few years. So, can you give us a
yeah.
little bit of a preview, perhaps, of what you're going to say there? Obviously, the talk
Mm.
itself will come out at some point in the future.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I will. Yeah, well, what I will do actually is I'll release the transcript of the talk on the day that I give it on my Substack, so
Oh,
people can
great.
read it. But yeah, actually, last year I spoke at the first one last year by video link. I was still anonymous then, but I spoke about endocrine disruptors basically, and I gave a primer on endocrine disruptors and talked about some of the things in the Tucker Carlson documentary, and said, we need to take the chemical assault on our bodies seriously. It's not enough, for example, just to do what Viktor Orban has tried to do in Hungary, where he's given tax breaks for young couples and interest-free loans and tried to, promote marriage. I said, actually, it's not just about the fact that people don't have enough money. It's about the fact that actually, we're being exposed to these chemicals, and sperm counts are declining so much, and it's making it harder for women to conceive, and all this kind of stuff. So it was about the kind of chemical assault, but this time I'm kind of talking. My talk's a bit more philosophical, actually. So I mean, I still think, obviously, still think that the endocrine disruptors thing is very, very important. I mean, it really, really is, really, really is. But there's a kind of philosophical problem too that I try to dig into that's actually encapsulated in Bronze Age mindset in the very famous aphorism where he talks about the fact that chimps in a state of nature don't jerk off,
Right.
right? And so I'm going to talk about whether the world we live in is a form of captivity and what that
Yes.
means,
Mm.
and whether we are like chimps in captivity. Because I mean, I saw someone actually say this on Twitter the other day, and it was quite insightful. They said something like referencing Bronze Age pervert and this aphorism about the chimps. They said, "Yeah, you can stop jerking off, but you're still a chimp in a cage."
Right.
And it's like, because people place a lot of store on no fap and not masturbating and all this kind of
Well,
stuff.
there's an
And
analogous line that I think also comes from
yeah,
Bronze Age mindset, which is noble animals refuse to breed in captivity.
yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, precisely. And so there's an interesting question, I think, about whether, because there will be a lot of people at the conference and a lot of people approach the fertility question in terms of in quite a technical manner where they're just like, okay, there are certain inputs that are wrong, and we just need to give people the things they need. You need to give young people money so that they
Yeah,
can
it doesn't
afford to
work.
have that they can, yeah, it doesn't work in Hungary, it doesn't work in South Korea, it doesn't work in Japan. um it's not a technical problem like fixing a circuit board. It's something else. I think that there is a deeper, like a spiritual crisis, a metaphysical crisis, whatever you want, ethical crisis, whatever you want to call it. And I do think that it does have something to do with the nature of the world that we have created, the broader um, system of meaning, whatever you want to call it, that we've created. And so it's quite speculative, and I'm talking quite a lot about animal studies and about studies of chimps in nature and in captivity. And there was a study that was done reasonably recently that showed that actually chimps in captivity start making sex toys for themselves, which is quite funny, using rocks.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is a weird thing that isn't actually observed in nature, I don't think.
Right.
So yeah, so it's a little bit more speculative, but it broadly is on that theme of, what's it are we in captivity, and what does that actually mean? What does that actually mean? How do we approach the problem then? If it actually turns out that we've created a system of captivity, and that's perhaps the reason why we're not reproducing, one of the reasons, a fundamental reason, then what can we do about that? And who knows?
Well, Raw Egg Nationalist, it's been an absolute pleasure. So glad to have you on. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. Please go check out everything he's doing over on his Substack, as well as on X, and get your maybe you can get your tickets to the Natal Conference, but at
Yeah,
least subscribe
actually,
to
I
Man's
was
World.
I was I was going to say yes. Actually, if you want to get 10% off a ticket
Hmm.
for the Natal Conference, use the special code Raw Egg at the website. That's natalism.org. Natalism.org.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.